Hello and welcome everybody. This is the Canadian Journalist episode on November 4th, 2023. Today we talk about Congress votes for a war with Iran. The 118th Congress First Session HRES 559 declaring it is policy of the United States that a nuclear Islamic Republic of Iran is not acceptable. In the House of Representatives on June 27th, 2023, Mr. McCall, for himself, Mr. Snyder, Mr. Lamborn, Mr. Golden of Maine, and Mr. Wilson of South Carolina, Mr. Sherman, and Mr. McCormick, and Mr. Manning submitted the following resolution, which was referred to the Committee on Foreign Affairs. Let's get into the story, guys. So, we have the military-industrial complex in high gear lately with obviously the war in Ukraine, the U.S. war versus Russia in Ukraine. And now we have another war. It's a very much the biblical style of war for how humans kind of absorb information. We have, the Iran connection. We have to the Palestine, possibly they want to make that connection because they want World War III. The industrial complex, the industrial military complex is in full swing. It is warmongering. The U.S. House of Representatives passed House Resolution 559 on Wednesday, which paves the way for a war with Iran over nuclear weapons. The resolution declares that it is the policy of the United States that a nuclear Islamic Republic of Iran is not acceptable. It says that the International Atomic Energy Agency, IAEA, confirmed in May of 23 that Iran continues to enrich uranium to 60% purity. That is the purity for nuclear power, not nuclear weapons. The resolution calls on the U.S. to use all means necessary to prevent Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. So that would include military attacks and presumably more cyber attacks, given that the U.S. is the only country to ever launch a cyber attack on an adversary with stuck necks during the Obama administration. But the FBI is warning that Iran will launch a cyber attack on the U.S. Here we have on Politico, U.S. officials hold their breath for Iranian cyber attacks. It goes on. Critical infrastructure owners and operators are stepping up security as the U.S. government keeps a close eye on evolving threats from Tehran in cyberspace. The U.S. government is preparing for a potential onslaught of Iranian cyber attacks in retaliation for support of Israel in its conflict with Hamas. It's far from just Israel at risk of cyber attacks from the Hamas-aligned regime's cyber operatives, U.S. officials say. They also see the U.S. and other nations that support Israeli governments as likely targets. Such attacks could take the form of attempting to damage critical systems like water or electricity, would more likely involve widespread disinformation efforts, and could also involve proxies to keep Iran's fingerprints off the incidents. Skipping ahead, multiple U.S. federal agencies have stressed that they have yet to see any intelligence suggesting that Iran is planning an imminent attack on U.S. critical infrastructure. But they're on heightened alert and hoping that new defenses they create after Russia invaded Ukraine, which brought worries about cyber attacks in the U.S. to the fore, will be able to adapt and grow to accommodating threats on multiple fronts. The article goes on, Tehran has long funded Hamas and other pro-Palestinian groups, and since the October 7th attacks by Hamas on Israel, Iran-backed armed groups in the Middle East have launched drone attacks against U.S. forces in Iraq and Syria. Back to my main story, I quote, the cyber targeting of American interests and critical infrastructure that we already see conducted by Iran and non-state actors alike, we can expect to get worse if the conflict expands, as will the threat of kinetic attacks. And that's from Homeland Security, Government Affairs Director Christopher Wray. He also warns that Iran has plans to assassinate current and former U.S. officials. And here we are at RT News, RT.com, guys. Iran planned to assassinate U.S. officials, says the FBI, Christopher Wray. It reads, Iran plotted to assassinate current and former U.S. officials, FBI Director Christopher Wray claimed on Tuesday as he warned of an increased terrorism threat during a Senate hearing. In his opening statement to the Committee on Homeland Race, said the terrorism threat to the U.S. has been elevated throughout 2023, but has risen to a whole other level due to the conflict between Israel and Palestinian militant group Hamas. Wray further claimed that Iran, which he described as the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism, had previously directly or indirectly mounted assassination attempts against dissidents and high-ranking current and former U.S. government officials, including right here on American soil. The FBI chief also said Lebanese militant group Hezbollah, which he described as Iran's primarily strategic partner, had a history of operating on U.S. soil, going back years, including by obtaining money and weapons and spying. At the same time, Wray noted that the FBI currently has no indications that Hamas has the intention or capability to carry out operations inside the U.S. I'm going to make a little sidebar, guys. This is exactly what warmongering is. He is starting to make the connection like, oh, we could be attacked in the U.S. by Hamas, when literally that is impossible. The Hamas is not a military group. They do not have international reach. They are fighting a war, their own battle right now for the land of the Palestinians versus the Israelis, and going back to the conflict of time in that region. This is nothing new to their region. There is no information or reasoning that they would attack off of this land. In fact, it's not a military operation group. It's just literally physically impossible. So the U.S. is doing this scaremongering. This is what this is, because they want to make more weapons to replace the old weapons, send the old weapons to Ukraine, send the old weapons to Israel, create new weapons, create new jobs, fund the military-industrial complex. The machine keeps on moving, building. For a little history lesson for everybody, let's take a look at the theory and practice of oligarchical collectivism by Emmanuel Goldstein. For those that don't know, this is a character in the book 1984 by George Orwell. And it depicts the war machine very clearly and very articulate. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead to page 242, guys, of 394 of 1984. Second part here. The essential act of war is destruction, not necessarily of human lives, but of the products of human labor. War is a way of shattering to pieces or pouring into the stratosphere or sinking in the depths of the sea, materials which might otherwise be used to make the masses too comfortable and hence, in the long run, too intelligent. Even when weapons of war are not actually destroyed, their manufacture is still a convenient way of expending labor power without producing anything that can be consumed. A floating fortress, for example, has locked up in it the labor that would build several hundred cargo ships. Ultimately, it is scrapped as obsolete, never having brought any material benefit to anybody. And with further enormous labors, another floating fortress is built. In principle, the war effort is always so planned as to eat up any surplus that might exist after meeting the bare needs of the population. In practice, the needs of the population are always underestimated, with the result that there is a chronic shortage of half the necessities of life. But this is looked on as an advantage. It is deliberate policy to keep even the favored groups somewhere near the brink of hardship, because a general state of scarcity increases the importance of small privileges and thus magnifies the distinction between one group and another. By the standards of the early 20th century, even a member of the inner party's lives and astir the laborious kind of life. Nevertheless, the few luxuries that he does enjoy, his large, well-appointed flat, the better textures of his clothes, the better quality of his food and drink and tobacco, his 2 or 3 servants, his private motor car or helicopter, set him in a different world from a member of the outer party. And members of the outer party have a similar advantage in comparison with the submerged masses whom we call the proles. The social atmosphere is that of a besieged city, where the possession of a lump of horseflesh makes the difference between wealth and poverty. And at the same time, the consciousness of being at war and therefore in danger makes the handing over of all power to a small caste seem the natural, unavoidable condition of survival. War, it will be seen, accomplishes the necessary destruction, but accomplishes it in a psychologically acceptable way. In principle, it would be quite simple to waste the surplus labor of the world by building temples and pyramids, by digging holes and filling them up again, or even by producing vast quantities of goods and then setting fire to them. But this would provide only the economic and not the emotional basis for a hierarchical society. What is concerned here is not the moral of masses, whose attitude is unimportant so long as they are kept steadily at work, but the moral of the party itself. Even the humblest party member is expected to be competent, industrious, and even intelligent within narrow limits. But it is also necessary that he should be credulous and ignorant, fanatic, whose prevailing moods are fear, hatred, adulation, and orgiatic triumph. In other words, it is necessary that he should have the mentality appropriate of a state of war. It does not matter whether the war is actually happening, and since no decisive victory is possible, it does not matter whether the war is going well or badly. All that is needed is that a state of war should exist. The splitting of the intelligence which the party requires of its members, and which is more easily achieved in an atmosphere of war, is now almost universal. But the higher up the ranks one goes, the more marked it becomes. It is precisely in the inner party that war hysteria and hatred of the enemy are strongest. In his capacity as the administrator, it is often necessary for a member of the inner party to know that this or that item of war's news is untruthful, and he may often be aware that the entire war is spurious and is either not happening or is being waged for purpose quite other than the declared ones. But such knowledge is easily neutralized by the technique of doublethink. Meanwhile, no inner party member wavers for an instant in his mystical belief that the war is real and that it is bound to end victoriously with Oceania, the undisputed master of the entire world. Now, guys, for my own insert here, it's quite an interesting analogy. It's like we could be digging up holes and filling them in. We could be producing food for the whole world and then burn it all. That's the exact analogy to war. Let's create these battleships, these war islands, which have no purpose. They don't feed anybody. They don't improve technology. They don't improve the comfort of life. They don't save people. They're not curing cancers. They're not helping the world. Let's just dig holes and refill them. The energy of all us humans is being wasted in the military-industrial complex, at the same time making the people in this niche rich as fuck. I really like that analogy, guys. If you want to hear more from the book of 1984, maybe we'll get to read more together. This is the Canadian Journalist, guys, on November 4th, 2023. Make sure you write in the comments what your thoughts are, and if you want to hear more from the book of 1984, have you read the book yourself? Are you familiar with Emmanuel Goldstein? What do you think about the perpetual war, the never-ending war? Do you even notice that war is going on or not going on? Thanks for watching.